Water has been used as a power source for over 2,000 years, being first mentioned by the Greeks. But it was the Romans who took the crude paddle-driven stone and turned it into a powerful technology. At Barbagal in southern France is one of the true wonders of the ancient world, a massive mill complex that was reputed to produce over 4.5 tons of flour per day. Water wheels have been providing power for centuries, from fulling mills to furnace mills, from pumping water to grinding grain. This technology was still being used in the 20th century. But that wasn't the only thing that watermills were capable of. About 1,000 years ago, a person or persons unknown looked at a watermill because it had all the machinery, all the cogs, all the grinding stones, all the machinery worked out, and decided, if I invert this and I put it on a tree trunk, I can move it into the wind, and in the process invented the windmill. And today we celebrate both water and windmills for National Mills Weekend 2022. Hi and welcome to National Mills Weekend 2022. We're back here at Nutley for more mills, thrills and spills as we look at wind and water mills up and down the country. But first, a word from Mildred Cookson, Chair of the SPAB Mills Section.
Welcome everybody to National Mills Weekend 2022. A different atmosphere this year after 2 years of mills not opening to the public. Thankfully, most mills processing flour were able still to do so, so that was good for them. And we thought this year, even though mills are opening, it was still a good idea to get Martin Taylor, who we're so grateful, to actually do another video for us for people who can't always get out to visit mills. The section, sadly, is missing this year one of our really important people, Alan Stoyle. He was so passionate about National Mills Weekend. He would travel around his own area and he got mills in Oxfordshire and in Herefordshire, 16 of them, who never opened their mills before, by gently persuading them how important their mills were and for people to be able to go along and see them and just show people that, you know, this is what's hidden away and how our country used to be with all these mills working. So I hope that all you mill owners, volunteers and visitors this year have a wonderful time, and do take photographs and send them in to us. We'd love to see them. We can put them on our website, and also I can use some of them to put in July's Mill News. So once again, I hope you all have a very good National Mills Weekend, and thank you for your support.
The question as to how to best preserve our industrial heritage has long concerned experts, and in 2014 I asked Jonathan Cook about his thoughts.
Is it important to have the mill working?
This is a really interesting point. So for people coming to look round a mill, clearly if a mill is working, is turning, it brings the whole experience to life. People can make sense of the machinery, the relationship between the building, the machinery and what the mill was intended to do. But there's also a challenge there, because if we're going to restore mills back to working order, in certain cases that's going to involve replacing parts of machinery, and there's a danger that in some situations that actually replacing what is required to be replaced in order that the mill can work again is going to leave you with quite a pastiche, because the mill is not what was originally built. You've got elements of that, and you've got lots of new elements being introduced. So there's a challenge there, and in fact from the section's perspective, there is a strong case that for certain mills, there are grounds to conserve the mill, but to conserve it in a way that it's not restored to working order.
So I went down to the Weald and Downland Museum in Sussex to see how they came up with a solution to the preservation of Hugoshell Watermill.
The mill itself dates from the late 17th century. It was built on the Kipworth estate. The building's been through lots of changes over the years. We know from our original specification it probably had 2 water wheels. So it could have had 4 sets of millstones. The current setup is 1 water wheel and 2 sets of millstones.
So it could have been quite a powerful mill.
Could have been a very productive mill, yes.
Yeah. And what happened to the mill?
We know it was still in production until the 1930s, although probably towards the end it wasn't milling flour. It would almost certainly have just been doing animal feed, because it was just uneconomic. Mills this size couldn't survive with the competition from the big mills. The miller, whether he was employed or on a franchise, stopped work and probably got another job, and the mill was left.
Just left to rot? So
It was, and sadly it suffered quite a bit within that period.
why was it considered important to save?
The philosophy behind what the museum does is to rescue buildings which are under threat. In this case, the building was just deteriorating, and the Kipworth estate offered it to the museum. This was quite early in the museum's history, so it sort of fitted in with their philosophy of rescuing buildings which otherwise would simply fall apart. Dismantling it, like all the buildings here, had to be done in a very detailed and painstaking way. So it was literally brick by brick, stone by stone. A lot of the timbers inside had been damaged, so new timbers had to be put in to replace those. The machinery, some of it was still in usable order, but it needed new millstones and probably a new great spur wheel, which is the gear that drives the millstones.
And is part of their philosophy to have the mill working?
Well, that was a very bold decision in my view. We are going back to the early days of the museum. They could have had it simply as a static exhibit, maybe power the machinery with electric motors so people could see how it worked. But it was a bold decision to actually build it because, as a working mill, because what it needed was a mill pond. And on this site, there was no mill pond.
So it was quite an investment to actually dig a pond and to provide some sort of recycling for the water.
Indeed, yes, because the geology around here is completely different to Hugoshell, where this mill comes from. Hugoshell is in sandstone and clay area, so lots of nice wooded valleys. Here we're on chalk. So to create a mill pond, you need a lined pond, and that was what they did. Going back to the basics, the water wheel is what's known as an overshot. So the water feeds over the top of the wheel. That's exactly how it was when it was set up in its original location. So it had to be set up with that height difference. The water wheel is about 12 foot in diameter. So they had to create that difference between the top pond and the exit pond. The machinery we've got here, as I said, we could power 2 sets of millstones, but for convenience we only use 1. The stones we use are modern burr stone, so a very hard stone, would last a lifetime. Traditionally in this country, millstones of course would have been sandstone, probably millstone grit from Derbyshire, but those stones wore out quite quickly and inevitably people ended up with grit in their bread. You don't get that with modern burr stone.
So the mill operates now as a working water mill?
It does. The bit we have to own up to is that the mill pond isn't fed by a stream. But basically what happens when the water's been through the water wheel, goes into a small pond, and from there gets pumped back to the main pond. The product is the same. It's stone ground wholemeal flour. We sell our flour through the museum shop, through several local outlets, and we supply artisan bakers. We're always on the lookout for new outlets, but as long as we've got customers, we'll produce the flour.
And what do the visitors think when they see this mill working?
They're fascinated. A lot of people don't appreciate how mills work. So actually to be able to see the machinery in operation, that's fascinating. A lot of them maybe have got some experience of windmills, seen them from the outside, perhaps really gone inside a mill.
And you are one of the millers who work there, so what's it like for you to actually be in the mill?
It's an enjoyable experience. I mean, it's nice to be productive. So I mill maybe 1-2 days a week at most. There'll be different groups of millers in each day. We try and mill most days if we need to top up production, but it is a genuinely nice experience. You're working, you're producing something, and you're engaging with the public.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
The SPAB is also very concerned about the future of millwrights throughout the whole country. And we are now working with the main society, the mill section, on the mill fellows and scholars. The fellows now have an opportunity to apply to be a Millwright Fellow. This lasts for 1 year. And during that time, they visit all sorts of people, stonemasons, brick people, glaziers, and that type of thing. But they also visit mills. And between the blocks, they have 3 months and a break, 3 months, a break, 3 months. And during the breaks, they go and visit as many mills as we can get them to. And Owen Bushell this year is our Millwright Fellow, and he's been visiting mills throughout the country.
Well, my background, I'm a sign writer, a multi-trade craftsperson really. I do a bit of sign writing, I make shingles up in the Highlands from Scottish larch. Got my toe dipped in lime, do a bit of timber framing from time to time with round with timber framing. So I kind of do all sorts, a bit like the description of a millwright, jack of all trades.
And what does being a mill fellow involve?
Well, basically I'm doing the SPAB's fellowship programme, the same as the other 3 participants. We do 8 weeks on, and then they go back to work for roughly 8 weeks. And then in that time I'm funded to undertake training in millwrighting. So I spend over the course of the year 3 months additional training on top of the normal SPAB fellowship programme in millwrighting.
How did you apply for the programme?
Initially I didn't know that there was the millwright placement, but when I did a bit of further reading, it's like, well, that's up my street. So I gave it a go, and here we are.
What would you like to get out of the programme?
A nice secure lease on a mill would be pretty fine. But varying from hoping that some sort of magic opportunity lands itself in front of me, right through to probably more realistically having a skill set, or increasing a skill set in maintaining and operating water mills and having specialist knowledge in that field, and being able to make probably part of my living from it up in the Highlands. There's currently, to the best of my knowledge, nobody doing millwrighting north of Perth. Just like there's nobody doing sign writing and nobody's doing shingle making. I've got a bit of a niche going on up there.
And we wish Owen and all the other mill fellows all the very best for the future. Charlecote Watermill, near Stratford-on-Avon, has a miller, Carl, who, like Owen, is a previous SPAB Mill Fellow.
Hello, my name's Carl Gravatt and I run Charlecote Mill. I'm its miller. It's an amazing place. It's very unspoilt, very original, and everything here is done the old-fashioned way. So it's all using traditional techniques, and that means tuning yourself into the mill. So it's using the sense of feel, sense of the vibration. It kind of does speak to you. The mills are alive and they do speak to you. And it's knowing what it's saying, what it's doing, and what it wants you to do. And again, it's you trying to tame that as well, so it's doing what you want it to do. And you learn how to work with the building. It's kind of all-encompassing, really. The only way you learn to do it is to actually be here and experience it and absorb yourself in being a miller. It's nice when you can walk away from it and do other jobs, and it's milling nicely. You don't work mills for a huge amount of money, you work them because you love doing it and you love looking after it. It's still owned by the family that built it, and it's leased to a miller, as it always has been. So it's been leased to me since 2012, and yeah, it's quite special. The mill's getting on for nearly 300 years old. We think it was built around 1750. And suddenly I'm a part of its history as well. You know, I've joined that long line of millers who have worked here, loved this building, maintained it, repaired it, and that's continuing today. When it's running smoothly and everything's doing exactly what it should be doing, you know you've got it right. It's great. It absolutely, you know, you're just walking around with it and everything's there in the right place at the right time, and that's lovely. You know, I feel the mill's moving forward the whole time as well, in the sense of it's in better condition than I got it when I first came here, and hopefully I'll leave it in better condition to the next person, the next miller who comes along. So hopefully that line of history will just keep continuing, and if the mills continue to be maintained and looked after and run in a traditional manner, it will keep moving forward, and it will stay in good working condition, and there's no reason why it can't kind of progress into the future, which really is the end goal. If I can pass it down to somebody who then learns the skills and the craft to look after the mill, and then they can continue that into the future. I think that's what I'd like to do.
Situated in the heart of Leicestershire is Kipworth Harcourt. This small parish has had a mill since around 1265, whose ownership first passed to Merton College, Oxford, and then, in 1936, to the SPAB Society to ensure its preservation. The mill itself is the only remaining post-mill in Leicestershire, and as such is historically significant. Although remedial work was carried out in the 1930s and again in 1970, it now requires a major restoration to preserve it for future generations.
My name's John Wallace. I'm the Managing Director for Dorothea Restorations. We as a company restore historic and architectural ironwork, historic machinery and wind and water mills. So mill writing is a large part of what we get involved with. Restoration is a really interesting subject. It's always different, nothing's ever the same, no challenges are ever the same. I think for me it's trying to get the historic structures working again as they probably would have been, as best we can, but using traditional methods, traditional materials, trying to conserve the mills and then trying to get them to a point where they can demonstrate themselves again. This mill is very interesting. It's also a scheduled ancient monument as well as being listed. So there's a lot of rules around what you can and can't do. It's a very old post mill. It might be one of the oldest in this country. There are tests being carried out at the moment to find out the age of it. It brings its own challenges. It's been here for a significant amount of time, possibly hundreds of years. But the whole mill has sagged, and the trestle which it sits on, so the quarter bars and the cross trees at the bottom of the mill, are all rotten on the ends.
Do you try and keep as much of the original building material as possible?
Absolutely. We take out the minimum amount of timber that we can, scarf in new joints, new timber, same timber that was used originally, and use traditional methods for pinning it all back together again. It'll bring it back to a rotating condition is what we're calling it. So the sails will be able to rotate and the internal machinery will be able to rotate. Whether it's appropriate to put it back into milling condition and produce flour, I think we're going to see how the mill reacts when things start rotating. It's a very old mill, this, so we've got to be a bit careful about doing any further damage to the structure or the fabric in the future. We started stripping off various bits in the weatherboarding and taking off some of the roof sheeting and things like that, and found there's quite a lot of decay in areas that you would expect there to be, so all the areas where the boarding has failed or the water's got in.
So this is what you call a breast beam. We're replacing this just due to the fact the other one was severely rotten. It's quite an important part of the mill. This is actually supporting the wind shaft. It takes the full weight of the sails. We cut it to size back in the workshop, We then craned up and over the scaffold and then manhandled it up into its position. It weighs roughly about a quarter of a ton in weight, so as you can imagine it's very, very difficult to lift up and in by hand.
I'm taking cores out of various bits of the wood in an attempt to date them through dendrochronology, tree ring dating. So I've just taken this core. It's crude state, it gets cleaned up, sanded, but you can probably see some traces of rings in here, and those rings represent the different growth rates in different years, so it should be unique to the time the tree grew in. And when I've taken that home, polished it up and measured the rings, hopefully we'll be able to tell when the tree was growing and when it died, because we've got the outside of the tree on there. And they used the trees pretty much straight away, they weren't seasoned. I've done 7 so far, including the lower part of this main post, which is one of the important timbers that they didn't manage to date previously. These are exceptional timbers. Quite often these main posts are the oldest bit of a mill because they get reused time and time again.
The trestle holds up the entire mill, so if there's any rot or wear in that, then there's quite a lot of risk to the mill. We've found that on every cross tree and quarter bar at the end, they are completely rotten. The joints have all completely gone. So it's a bit of a miracle this mill stayed stood upright for as long as it has. So we have devised a way of jacking the mill up. We've done that, and we're now in the process of cutting off all the rot and scarfing in new sections of timber where required. It's a pleasure to work on an old building, particularly one that's been put together in such a good way. There's a lot of craftsmanship here. It's also a challenge. Every time you sort of undo a joint or scarf something else in, there's potential for finding more work, more rot. But just working out how it all interacts with each other is a challenge, but a fun one.
In the East End of London, there's a rather secret place, 3 Mills Island. It's surrounded by canals, by gasometers, by the Underground Railway, and everywhere I look, there is new building going on. Behind me is Hugoshell, and Hugoshell, in its current form, has been here since the 18th century, and I'd like to discover some of its history and take a look at what its future might be. Was there an actual house here?
Yes, the mill was built between 2 houses. It was built between the mill owner's house and the mill manager's house. But a fire in 1941 burnt out both houses on either side of the house mill. That gave the house mill its name, but rather remarkably, the wooden building in the middle that we are now standing in, completely wooden, survived completely unscathed that experience.
And how did a tidal mill work? Because I'm used to how a watermill works. Is a tidal mill a different beast?
It is totally. A tidal mill works by holding back water behind the mill to create power for the mill. So what happens is that the tide ambles up, coming in this case from Limehouse up to the house mill at Bromley by Bow. It goes underneath the mill and heads for a mill pond created artificially behind the mill to feed both this mill and the clock mill adjacent, which has also survived. At the highest point of the tide, the milling staff would have had to come into the mill, lower what are called sluice gates into the bed of the river and create an artificial dam across the whole width of the mill. He would then have had thousands and thousands of tons of water behind the mill. He would then pause and wait for the tide to go out at the front of the mill. He has then got a height inside the mill, and the water retained drops through the height, hitting the water wheels and feeding them and powering them. And we understand in this particular mill, which we understand to be the biggest tidal mill of its type in the world, that it could run for up to 8 hours on one single flow of water from the back to the front.
That's pretty impressive. Can you tell me a little bit more about Housemill itself? What sort of equipment does it utilise?
The Housemill's a bit of a curiosity because it's actually, in its remaining structure, it has the old system that I would describe it, and it has a new system. In the late 1800s, the Housemill was upgraded by its owners, and new machinery, colloquially known as Fairburn's silent running machinery, but probably based on his designs rather than built by him directly, was installed. And because of the size and scale of the mill, they appear to have literally moved up the mill and installed huge new machinery and left the old behind, which is somewhat of a rarity. Unfortunately for us, in the 50s, the scrap men were allowed to come in and take out the cast iron for reasons we don't know. The main quirk in this was that instead of going into a damsel, the grain slid onto a curved steel plate, and that gave it its description of quiet machinery, though I suspect it probably wouldn't have been quiet in actual operation, but it was some of the most advanced machinery of its type before they gave up on stone milling completely.
I believe that the mill that we're standing in now dates from around 1800, is that correct?
Yeah, it has a cartouche on the front which gives it a date of the 1700s, but we've established that that mill burnt down, and tree ring dating of the beams suggests that this building dates from about 1812. The mill and the clock mill adjacent were both repurposed, and the site became a major site for alcohol production and grinding grain for distillation into alcohol because of a peculiar moment in history called the gin craze. And you can only have a gin craze if you can actually grind grain and build it in scale to supply to the public. And so this mill was rebuilt by a consortium specifically to grind grain for distillation into alcohol, which gave it a market and gave it its long life of production thereafter. Well, the mill is a totally wooden building with a brick frontage for effect, presumably to show the wealth of the miller. And what's fascinating is these ship's knees taking the whole weight of the back of the building. So what we've actually got across the back of the mill is the effect of a wooden ship. All the wheels are what are called undershot water wheels, which means once you lift the sluice gate, the water is hitting the bottom of the wheels, except for the last wheel, which is what is technically called a mid-breast shot wheel. So we have 4 different water wheels representing 4 different periods of milling technology.
So I'm here with Beverly to talk about Housemill's future.
Thank you. Yes, we're really excited about Housemill's future. We feel we've got one, and it has longevity. Within a couple of months, we're going to have some capital works done at the front of the building. In addition to that, we have developed over the last couple of years quite a busy programme. So it's very important to us to continue to develop new ways in which the building can be seen and be loved by people. Without that, we don't have a future. In the longer term, we have a plan which we developed with some HLS funding around 2012, and we know what we would like to do towards getting the wheels turning again. So that will be to demonstrate milling, I would say more importantly, it's more importantly as an income generator, but I think it's very exciting to give the building a brand new use, is to make hydroelectricity. So that, of course, it would give us carbon neutral here, and we could also sell the leftover into the national grid. But I think as well, then for particularly younger visitors, perhaps they would really understand why we want to save this building. It gives it a contemporary, it gives it a future use, rather than just at the moment seeing it as a building that doesn't work, that perhaps should be pulled down.
Wind has been powering the sails here at Nutley Mill for at least 150 years, giving the power to grind grain into flour for the local population. Today, we still use wind power for wind turbines to generate a green electricity. However, the turbine blades themselves are not recyclable. This is proving a problem, and in Ireland, the ReWind project is looking at an approach to repurpose old wind turbine blades.
It's a fantastic project, actually. So it's across 3 different countries. So it's across Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, and the United States. So we're in Georgia Tech in Atlanta in the US, and Queen's University in Belfast, and University College Cork here in Ireland, and Munster Technology University also in Cork. And there's an assortment of different disciplines in this. So we've got structural engineers and geographers up in Queens. We've got structural engineers and architects and designers in Georgia Tech. And then in University College Cork, we've got myself, who's working on the environmental life cycle assessment. So doing an assessment to see if we actually are improving on the environmental performance of disposing blades. The wind blades are made out of glass fiber reinforced polymer. It's kind of basically the same material as a boat hull, and it's quite expensive to try to recycle the material back to the glass fiber and polymer portions. So in lieu of that, what we're suggesting is repurposing the blade. So the problem right now is that it costs more to recycle the blade, but there isn't a clear recycling path that can handle the volumes of blade waste.
Can you tell me a little bit about the blade bridge?
It's a 6-meter long pedestrian bridge on a new cycleway that's going in near the town of Middleton, which is just outside of the city of Cork. We acquired the blades just before Christmas, so in December of 2020. So there's a lot of effort that our research team had to put into reverse engineering the blades that we wouldn't have had to do had the manufacturers just given us some of the drawings and the designs, and the bridge was installed on the Greenway at the end of January this year.
Does it require any extra engineering?
It's an excellent question, and that's exactly what I'm looking at from an environmental standpoint is, we tend to think that repurposing and reusing things is always better than not, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not better, actually, if it takes a lot more repair and refurbishment. So the shape of the blade, you see the leading edge, it's just like an airplane wing. The leading edge is the more rounded edge, and the trailing edge is where it, comes to a point. And we chose to turn the trailing edge pointed up. And that edge had a bit of work that needed, it needed to be sanded back by a steel fabricator. My last research paper that I wrote, I was estimating maybe we could use 20% of the Irish generated blade material on an assortment of different applications, the blade bridge being the first one that we've tested out. So if Ireland continues to build cycleways at the pace that they're hoping for, we think that we could use about 20% of the Irish blade material starting from around 2025 in bridges, say for about 10 years.
But with new research, the future for turbine blades is changing.
The equipment manufacturers are working on coming up with a blade that's recyclable, and Siemens Gamesa have released their first blade that's fully recyclable. But unfortunately, we've got 25 years of material that's already gone in that isn't recyclable. So that's the obvious thing to do is to think through the full life cycle of the blades when they're being designed. So the durability of this FRP, the fiber reinforced polymer material, is a huge benefit. So the difficulty in reusing and repurposing the blade material is the shape of it. It's just really difficult to figure out, how to take that mad shape, which is, three-dimensional, and it not only changes in this direction here, but it also rotates this way. So it's actually really difficult to figure out to cut it so that it replaces common structural components. But for now, all our project is looking at is what to do with the material that is not yet recyclable, and how can we, I suppose, put a dent in the amount of waste that's being generated.
Can I just ask you why you decided to come and visit Nutley Mill today?
The main thing that I was curious about was this is apparently the only remaining functioning mill of its type in the country. So as a result of that, and how old the design is, and how long it's been in this place, and also how many times it's been moved across the country, I just find that history going back that far, that much of a legacy, I just find that interesting, basically.
We've heard of it, and we went to visit another windmill last week, and we saw the advertising, and we thought that'd be really interesting because it's another post mill.
And we came across it by chance when we were walking across Ashdown Forest, and we said we must come back and see it, so that's what we've done today.
I'm sitting here at the lower floor of the city mills in Perth. There's been mills here for quite a long time. We think the lathe itself was here since at least 1313, when Robert the Bruce attacked the city, because at that time it was described that it was the moat around the medieval city walls. The earliest record of an actual mill on the site comes from another military record from 1715, and this was when Lewis Pettit was examining, who was a military engineer, was examining the defences of the Jacobites who were entrenched in the city. And he noted that there was several mills just on this point. Subsequent to that, through the Industrial Revolution, there were upwards of 16 or 17 mills, some quite large ones, along our lathe, which is 4.5 kilometres long. So, yeah, the present building was once two mills, one on either side of the lathe, and they each had their own water wheel. And then after a fire in, if memory serves me correctly, 1850, it was rebuilt, and they decided to share one large water wheel.
The mill declined. Can you tell me what happened?
This mill itself is part of a small complex. It mainly milled oats and some barley, and across the road in what's now a hotel was a wheat mill. So this mill in particular operated up until 1966, and then fell into disrepair for probably about 2 decades. So during the 1980s, Perth District Council, or Perth and Kinross District Council as it was then, set about a large refurbishment of the site. So what they did was they converted one side of the building into offices and craft workshops and removed mill machinery. They then consolidated all the mill machinery in the other side, and they used the entire exercise as a big training program. Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust will then be following on in a similar vein. It again fell into disuse, or rather the mill side was kind of mothballed for 20 years between approximately 2001 and when we came in 2019. But we're now looking at again a refurbishment of the building, although the machinery is in quite good condition because of the 1980s refurbishment. But we will also use that as an opportunity to train up more millers and hopefully some more millwrights if we can.
The power of the mill comes from the water, but what are the problems with the water actually coming to the mill?
So we've had a little bit of difficulty with testing the machinery because of the levels of water that exist in the lake at the moment. Being a 4.5 kilometre long blade that leads into a tidal river, the River Tay. There's lots of other considerations about how much water that might be in there, particularly in situations of flood. So our water flow is not quite at the level where we can turn the wheel very regularly. So we're having ongoing discussions about how that could be investigated and managed better. And once we have the wheel turning, we'll be able to assess exactly the condition that the machinery is in, and then hopefully be able to rejuvenate to mill to some degree, whether that's just for demonstration or for education, or whether we can go into small scale production.
In early March 2022, the sails were ready to be put back onto the newly restored post mill at Kipworth by the Millwrights Dorothea Restorations. These new sails were handmade by the Millwrights in their Bristol workshop. A pattern of each sail was copied from the old sail so as to keep the mill as authentic as possible. Kipworth Windmill has two types of sail. The first type are canvas common sails, and the second type are spring shutter. The common sail is the closest that it is possible to get to a medieval type sail, where a cloth sail is stretched across a wooden lattice framework. At Kipworth, the final fixings are attached, ready for the sail to be lifted into position. As each sail weighs around half a ton, a crane was used to safely manoeuvre the sail onto the stock, the wooden timbers that go through the windshaft. This arrangement makes it easier to replace a sail if one is damaged, rather than having to remove the sail itself from the windshaft. Each sail is carefully bolted onto the stock, making it secure. The other sail at Kipworth is the spring shutter type, invented by Andrew Meikle, the Scottish millwright. In this example at Green's Mill in Nottingham, the Venetian blind effect is clearly seen, providing a flat surface for the wind to push against. Tensioned by a spring, which can be adjusted to the current wind speed, the shutters open or close depending on the gusting of the wind. The drawback of the spring shutter, like the common sail, is that when you wish to adjust the sail for the changing winds, the mill has to be stopped. The later patent sail, invented by Sir William Cubitt in 1807, was to become the summit of Windmill sail design. This was due to its ability to be able to be adjusted whilst the sail is in motion. Here at Foster's Mill, you can see the miller, Jonathan Cook, adjusting the sail by the use of weights hung on an endless chain. This gives the miller a greater control of the grind, whilst not having to stop the mill. Kipworth now has its full complement of sails and is ready to turn once more into the wind.
So that's about it from Nutley for this year, and please go and enjoy visiting your local mill. And from all of us, please enjoy National Mills Weekend 2022. Bye!